Welcome to another episode of Project Stand's podcast, a blueprint where we are having honest conversations with student activists, memory workers, archivists, artists, historians, scholars, and everyone in between to intersect with the creation of documenting, advocating, and archiving the preservation of histories related to student activism in Black and Brown communities and other marginalized student populations. My name is Lae'l Hughes-Watkins. I am the founder of Project Stand, and today I am so excited. I am joined with my amazing co-host, Valencia Johnson, who is the archivist for student life at the University of Princeton. Valencia is just an all-around amazing person and just a great gem to the profession, and I'm glad that she's on the mic with us today to be with our next podcast episode. So thank you so much, Valencia.
Thank you. I'm excited to be here. And we are joined with Alex Soto, who is a member of the Tohono O'odham Nation and is a second-year graduate student earning a Master's of Arts in Library and Information Science from the University of Arizona. He is a Knowledge River, ALA Spectrum, and ARL Kaleidoscope scholar. Alex's journey to librarianship comes after years of success as a touring hip-hop musician and educator and activist. As a graduate student, Alex has realized the importance of culturally relevant information literacy within tribal communities and the role of reparative archives in strengthening Indigenous sovereignty. Alex manages the Labriola National American Indian Data Center at Arizona State University and leads Labriola's engagement activities, facilitates ASU's community-driven archive initiative in tribal communities, and serves as a liaison to Indigenous faculty. Recently, Alex helped co-author the library's first land acknowledgement statement. Alex believes Indigenous librarianship synthesizes his creative, cultural, and professional backgrounds, as well as his interest in social justice and community building. Welcome, Alex, to the podcast.
What up, y'all? Good morning, good day, wherever you're at. Glad to be here. Thank you for, the awesome intro and everything. So, yeah, thank you. It's good to be part of this awesome project and folks at Project Stand. So.
Thank you so much for joining us, Alex. And that is quite an awesome bio, so we can't just gloss over
no.
richness that's packed in there. So if you could unpack yourself for us, for our listeners and for our viewers. So, before you got into library land, information literacy world, you were a touring hip hop musician, educator, activist. Give us some insights into your life and how those fed into each other.
All right, well, I'll also start from the roots. Skukselik, Anyanap Chugi, Alex Soto, Anyanap Amjik, Awasak, Tohono O'odham Amjik. So my name's Alex. I'm originally from the Tohono O'odham Nation, from the community of Cells, which is located on the Tohono O'odham Nation. Myself as an Indigenous person from what is now southern Arizona and northern Sonora. My people have been in this desert, the Sonoran Desert, since time immemorial. So that's the roots, where I come from, my community. Cells is, I guess you would say, the capital of the tribe, in terms of just the, population and just where folks live. But throughout the nation, it's actually the size of Connecticut. So, my area is located somewhere in the central part of the reservation. But really, my roots stem south of there. Because Cells is about, it's 60 miles west of Tucson, Arizona, but it's also about 25 miles north of the U.S.-Mexico border. So my family roots actually stem along that journey south because just like other folks across the world who are obviously migrating, and being who they are, my tribe also migrated, back and forth before there was ever a border. So my community, I have a lot of communities. I'm from south of there. My grandparents have roots on the other side in Mexico. But just due to work, education back then in the 40s and 50s, it slowly migrated and ended up in Cells, and then eventually ended up in Phoenix for those same reasons. So that's kind of how I came to be, because fast forward, my grandparents had my mom, aunties, uncles, and all that. And then, here I am in the 80s, I pop up. So I'm an 80s baby, grew up in Phoenix. But despite being born in Phoenix, I also, my grandparents made it a point to always take me back to the reservation. So that was either through weekly, literally weekend trips on throughout the year, or just extended stays in the summer and so on. So that's kind of my dual reality in that sense of growing up in Phoenix, but also growing up in that sense on the reservation too. I know going down there to my grandparents' house, seeing my relatives, and also just seeing friends and so on. So that really helped me, get a better idea of maintaining my roots and ties, but also in terms of just the school and everything, it gave me that perspective that I am different. I come from a unique background in that sense. But one thing that helped make sense of it all was hip hop music. Growing up in town, hearing narratives of this awesome African American MCs. Back in the day, whether that's Rakim, whether that's old school hip hop. Back in the '80s that my parents listened to, Run DMC. Grandmaster Flash, Furious 5, that was what I grew up around back then. And then fast forward, it's the 90s, you got like Dre and Snoop, Tribe Called Quest, De La Soul, you see the native tongues, you see all that. So that's kind of how I related my indigeneity, seeing that Afrocentricism in their music, but also knowing obviously that's where they're from, but where I'm from, this is what speaks to me. So, through that journey, going for school, high school, Phoenix, early 2000s, just wanting to find a way or a medium to vent, to share who I am, express who I am. That's how hip hop came to be, because out here in the Southwest, especially Phoenix, is a huge hip hop scene culture, especially back then, and especially with Native folks. So it was a very a universal craft. I think the importance of hip hop, it's universal, and to see it all the way out here in Phoenix, all the way in the Southwest, and going to b-boy jams, going to a lot of my friends, doing graffiti, writer's block sessions and all that, and just kind of being in that culture, but also being Native too, and seeing a lot of other Natives doing the same thing, and seeing how they would sprinkle in their indigeneity, with like certain imagery, feathers, in their artwork, or just kind of like traditional imageries and so on. So that really spoke to me of like, wow, like you can insert that part of you in this like newer form of expression, like everybody else was doing, African American, Mexican American, and so on. So yeah, it was an interesting time in the early 2000s. So that eventually led me to do music, getting the scene, battling it for ciphering, high school level and so on, and eventually forming a group named Shining Soul, which was initially a band, and then we turned more into a duo and a trio. But out of that, yeah, it was the same mentality of just wanting to express who we are, from Phoenix. And my bandmate, the other MC in my group, he was Chicano. So we did have that, dual background of like, hey, it's Native, have a Chicano, but we all came together because of hip hop. Eventually, our DJ, who's Navajo, was part of the crew. So like we had that element, but also this like from those early hip hop roots, knowing like, yeah, this is hip hop, right? You got to show and prove, got to come correct, and do all those things. So, but yeah, I can get more into the content of how our music came to be a little well known and popular. But while I was doing that, my side hustle was working in public libraries. So I was a part-time public library worker on the Phoenix Public Library System to help pay the bills. It's good to have a little stability when you're independent, especially coming out of that mixtape era, going into the SoundCloud digital stuff we got going on. But that's just the reality of artists sometimes. But libraries are awesome places to be supported at in this sense. But yeah, I didn't really realize a lot of, why I guess the archival side of it, some of the stuff I'm doing now, I didn't see that then. I was just more on the front line, just, being in a public library and just helping the community. And out of that, though, also then doing library programming with the librarians. And then out of one of our things in our group was to do beat making workshops for kids. So we would then use public library spaces, rec center spaces as a space to then share, hip hop, with samples, records. So yeah, it was a lot of work during that time to kind of bring it all together. But really showed us the impacts of hip hop, the impacts of how libraries can support like hip hop education, and also as a Native person, being a facilitator and being a practitioner in that sense. So I feel like I'm talking a lot, so I'm going to stop. But yeah, that's a little bit about myself. So.
We had a big question of unpacking yourself, so don't worry. It's good to talk a lot. And we're going to be asking for those links to your SoundCloud and the music that you're making now. So we'll come back to that. Don't worry. We will promote you.
So yeah, that's a little summary, I guess. It's been a minute since I've done a review of my life in that sense. So I love the on the spot, breakdown. But yeah, I mean that's this kind of sums up a lot of seeing just different levels of the need of like information literacy around this community education, we'll say, education that speaks to our backgrounds, and being a Native person growing up in town, and then seeing the difference, say, with relatives back on the res, maybe they're not, I don't want to say lack of, but, the difference in quality, in terms of like the environments they're living in, let alone education they're getting. I think that this speaks to like that divide, and I think hip hop culture was always a way just to spit that knowledge minus, whatever accolades or whatever you need. It's like, hey, here's what I know, right? I'm going to share it through this song. I'm going to share it through this rap or this mural or, these dance moves and so on. And I think that's always the power of like subcultures. Hip hop's one of them. I mean, it could be punk rock, could be, just whatever, different subcultures that we as young people adopt to survive in the world we're in. So
I do have one thought, well, two. I hope before we're done with you today that you can like do some improv. Like, hit us with something. That would be so amazing.
Man, you're gonna bring me out of retirement now. So
I'm sorry to put you on the spot, but something rolling around in there, we would really appreciate to hear you. But number two is when you said that your grandmother, I think you said, would bring you back to the reservation as a child, like just to keep you connected. Like, how important do you think that has been to your upbringing and as far as who you are?
Well, yeah, it was with my grandparents because, like I was saying in the beginning, how with not just my tribe, but all tribes really, is that at 1940s, the like 60s and 70s, it's a lot of struggle, in terms of just federal policy, in terms of the social realities, social ills and so on. And you have like World War II and Vietnam and all those things. So you had my community was very disenfranchised, but just kind of still finding themselves. So like for my grandpa and grandma, at least, the moving to Phoenix, for work, for education, that was just the best option they could at the time, and out of that, there's always that trade-off, which is, okay, well, we have means to survive and provide with, my mother and my auntie and uncle and so on, but then you're losing that connection to the reservation. And I think those are a lot of tough decisions that I feel like those narratives are not really shared as much. I mean, they are, but sometimes I feel like they're kind of pushed to the side because we want to revitalize our culture and we want to talk about all the good things of our culture. But like our parents and grandparents made those tough decisions. So that being said, that was what, the 60s and 70s. And then with me in the 80s being, date myself, I'm born in 85. And growing up through the 90s, I think my grandparents realized, they saw those impacts in my own, in their children, right? My mother, their son and their daughters and so on. So like, I think it was important for them to say, hey, well, although we made those decisions then, we want to at least give Alex, and not just me, the grandkids, that opportunity to be around the culture, to have access really to what it means to be O'odham, because growing up now, or currently, I see those differences of folks who may not have had that experience, who may not have grandparents that do that. And it's not a knock on them or anything, but I feel like they just didn't have that access to traditional knowledge like I had, and able to then process a lot of like what I'm getting into now through libraries and archives from that traditional perspective, but in a way that also incorporates the modern, because that's basically what I've had to do my whole life, is to like remember those trips to those villages to talk to those elders, or like go on those be part of the ceremonies and so on, and also go to school like 2 days later in Phoenix. And a story that always trips me out is that minus like cultural activities and so on, just going to the res and maintaining my grandparents' house, and like going down the hill to go to this wash to get some sand to make some concrete. We were just doing all the things, working, all the work. And I remember first grade, doing that. I mean, doing it throughout my whole life, but I remember then, and then like 2 days later on Monday in school in first grade, I'm like writing, depicting what I did on the weekend, because that was like the assignment, like this kind of like visual journals, just draw what you did and write a summary or something. And I did, I put that in the journal. And then my teacher, she's white. She's like, "What are you doing?" And I was like, "Oh, well, it's kind of what I'm explaining right now." And she just kind of looked at me. She's like, what do you mean wash? Like, yeah, like a wash, like a little river, She's like, you mean like a wasp? She thought I was talking about a bug, like a bee, like an insect. And I was like, no, a wash. This is what I'm doing. And I kept elaborating, like, what I'm explaining to y'all now. And she just didn't believe that I went down to the res and did all that. And it just really pissed me off as like a 6-year-old. And I'm 6, right? I'm just kind of like, well, this is like what I do every weekend, and also knowing like, most 6-year-olds don't do that, right? They're just in the hood, they're down the road, they stay in town, they do, go to the grocery store or whatever. But yeah, so all those things, like that's what I'm saying. And certainly your question is that made me see very early on, just that duality and how that informs everything I've done up to this point, from my education, for music, for my own expression, and to libraries and archives, is that there's just certain things that you just don't know, or people won't know because they're not there. So how do we then share that in a way that brings people up to speed? Or like, why is this important, right? Why am I writing about my grandparents in this manner? Or why am I sharing what elders have shared to me around protocols and, around workitude or something? We get into all the archive stuff later. But yeah, that's kind of that root, that foundation. So.
You are an excellent transitioner, because that is the next question, is that duality. How has your experience so far as a graduate student from a tribal community that is working to receive a Master's of Arts in Library and Information Science, like how do you bring that into your program, or can you bring that into your program?
Well, I think the disclaimer in terms of like when I was sharing my background, like I was around 04, 05. Yeah, I went to community college, got my AA, just doing like those things, right? Go to school, graduate high school, get your degree and all that. So I went to community college, got my AA within like a year and a half, 2 years. But then afterwards, I did go to ASU initially back then, and it just wasn't for me. It wasn't like I guess I wasn't ready, or I just had no interest. I didn't know what I wanted to do, and so I took some classes and just eventually just stopped going. But at that same time, that's when I got into, I guess you would say, activism. I started, for music, and just for community issues, and just kind of in an organic way, recognizing these other things going on, where I was like, I don't need school. I'll just help the people in that sense, or do music, and just the hell with school. So like there was a gap between like 07 to about 2017, which I'll get into in a second. But like in that time period, that's when I guess I experienced like life in that sense of like knowing like this is what's going on in the world, and like this is another form of education that you're not going to get in a book, you're not going to get in class. You can, but you're going to get however it's broken up and sold to you in that sense. But it was more of like this wanting this help, right? Wanting to, obviously as a musician, as an artist, pursuing those things. It's like any other musician, but also recognizing, wait a minute, like these issues going on that my music can help highlight and uplift these narratives and struggles, similar to hip hop, like a conscious hip hop song, or similar to any, form of art that's, critical and brings up those issues. So when I got into school, I guess I had that advantage of like I already lived a lot of these things, because like I went back in 2017 to finish my American Indian Studies undergraduate degree, because I just needed like a year or two. So even in that immediate level, I could tell like, whoa, like I compared to some of my peers, and it's not to like brag or anything, but it's like, yeah, like I know firsthand what the hell we're reading about. I know firsthand, what does that mean for my community? So in terms of library school, in my graduate program, it's a very similar experience, mainly because I am working in the Labriola Center, also seeing these things in real time being discussed or being addressed, and also seeing just kind of where the field's at, which maybe y'all have more perspective in terms of like diversity, in terms of like native initiatives and native archival, informed practices, that are, to me, like long overdue, and from what I can see, and what I I've read in my schoolwork, where it's like, why are we still talking about this 13 years later? Why are we still trying to figure this out? But I guess that's where folks like myself and other Native information professionals are why we're here, right? To like bridge those gaps. And so in terms of that, that knowledge that I shared from my own upbringing for music, for activism, it's just, that's just who we are when we come into the profession, right? We're always fighting. We're always finding ways to help our community. And we're always finding creative ways to engage. So in my case, it's more on a musical tip, right? But even then, I'm sure there's plenty of scholars and academics, BIPOC folks who have to be just as creative to get that paper published, right? Or get that whatever initiative going, that we have to do more work than, say, our white colleagues. And so that's kind of what I kind of feel like what I'm able to translate, is like I've always had to hustle in that sense, always had to push, I always had to like find a way to find a way. And I think that's the part where, in graduate school, it is an advantage in many ways, but also it's kind of this, why do I have to do double or triple the work to get this across? So luckily in my program at University of Arizona, I feel there's a little more awareness in some of these things, but I can just imagine going to a different program back east, or, where maybe natives are not as visible. So.
In your bio, you mentioned reparative archives, and you mentioned how that has been a means to strengthen Indigenous sovereignty. Can you speak to that a little bit for us?
Well, as we all know, when you came out here at ASU, with Nancy Godoy's work, where I think that was in many ways, and I told her this many times, she always blushes. It's like or her work, has really helped guide everything I kind of shared right now, where I'm like, whoa, I didn't know you can do that in archives, through archives. I didn't know about this, right? Like in learning from her and her team's work, and seeing not just her, it's kind of a bigger movement with community archives, right, on an international level, but to see it in Arizona, to see it from quote unquote marginalized communities out here, and to then like also know that natives were already reaching out to her before I even got on board. So like, to me, that's the part that really like hit home, because it is an O'odham, we just share these stories, share these songs. We do it in a way that we're not trying to take something from you, right? Or we're not trying to own it, or so on. So with the community driven archives work, that really spoke to me, because it's like, wow, like here's Nancy and her team just like sharing this knowledge, not expecting nothing back, and just like finding a way, like I said earlier, through the Mellon grant she received, to make it happen. So although you wish, you say, the university would be supportive of this, she had to carve that lane, make that lane. So when I saw that, and then being part of that, her work initially, and then branching off through the Labriola Center, with her blessing in that way, to say, hey, like I trust you on the native side to do your part, because out of it, like just sharing our stories, just documenting them, like that's like the baseline that natives need to do at the very least in academia, let alone the world, is because people don't know we're here. So like to be in Arizona, where like only 7% of the archives have a native holdings, let alone that 7% may or may not be from natives, it's more from white institutions. That just shows like, wow, there's a lot of work that needs to be done. And it also shows that it needs to be done in the right way. It needs to come from the community, with that consent, compared to, of course, the opposite, which would be, some institution coming in and doing it for us. So I think, to me, it speaks to my native, roots. It's just the way to go at it. It's like, you need to have that consensus. You need to have that consent to be able to talk about these things first and foremost. And then based on that, you can share whatever the community wants. So like, I know for oral history, for the language, like that can do so much, in terms of just gathering those stories and from fluent speakers still, or even then relating that to kind of what's in terms of memory and so on with photos, like remembering how at least my res used to be before the U.S. Border Patrol has militarized the reservation. But I didn't get into that part, which I kind of skipped over between '07 and 2017. Is that all this stuff on the border? Like our community straddles 75 miles of the border, right? We have to go through checkpoints to get out the res, So like out of that, I'm a friend of mine pointed this some years ago is that, like I said, I'm an 80s baby, but we're the ones who kind of remember what it used to be before all this came. So all the kids that were born after us, they're just used to this. So I feel like just a photo of showing what the land looked like before the vehicle barriers, which is what we have as a wall right now. It's not a wall, it's just these vehicle barriers. I remember going there where there's no vehicle barriers. It was open land. Literally, there was no difference between the US side and Mexico. So to find photos like that and then have elders talk about that time period and to share that with the younger generation that was born in the past 15 to 20 years, who all they know is border patrol checkpoints, I think that speaks a lot to like that community memory. And so like with Nancy's work, I think that's one way to highlight and uplift those voices, because I think we all have photos, we all have stories, but it's not organized or we don't look at it that way. And I think with that approach of our archival work shows that we can really tap into that community memory. And I think that's the hard part. Even though we have social media, even though we have like all these ways to connect, I think people are still kind of siloed off because they feel alone or they don't feel like this is a topic, right? Or a way to do it. And that's why I'm like, oh, well, that's why we have archivists. That's why we have librarians. We can bridge the gap, with cultural leaders and with other folks doing this work, in the community. But I don't know, that's how I see it and why it's important to me.
I kind of feel like we should be asking him, like, we still we have these conversations, and they're valid conversations about whether academia should be a part of this work. It's that push and pull. Like, should we really be putting our fingers and interacting with these communities, which academic institutions have historically not done their due diligence to have positive, fruitful, non-traumatic, traumatizing relationships. So, and thinking about the fact that you have had these positive interactions because of Nancy and the team that she's had and the work that she's been doing, like, what would you say as a counter to that argument?
Yeah, I will say that there's other institutions in this state that have not had the best relationship with my community, let alone Native communities. And there's definitely, I'm very aware of like academia's tentacles, right, getting in and doing what they do. That's inherently what those institutions are in many ways they're made for. But I think back to the Nancy, this is why I always make her blush. It's like, yeah, you have confronted that, right? And you're trying your best to like establish those boundaries. And so, of course, as how it is in the field, we work for these institutions, right? We all work for these institutions, but how do we then make it about the community and not the profession? And I think that's something that's always resonated with me, with hearing from her and others, from the same cloth, is that we work for so and so, and we're doing what we do, but yeah, this is ultimately driven by our love for our community. It's ultimately driven by the love of our wanting to help these things that I went over, like my own journey to get here. And so, in terms of the opposite side of that, I think it becomes apparent in those conversations when you engage those type of individuals from that other set of mentality, or driven by an institution that looks more in that way. And like I said, for natives, we've always had that issue. I mean, if anything, what I'm doing now, what I'm advocating now, what I'm saying now, can kind of, it takes a while for my own community to understand that, right? Because, you work at ASU, right? Or you work at whatever institution. And so, like, it's funny because with the tribal librarians in the state, there's another one I work with, and she worked for the state of Arizona. And we always joke around when we're in those tribal librarian meetings, because, they're working for their tribes. And here we are, she's the state of Arizona, I'm ASU. So we joke around. So yeah, we're the enemy, right? Like, we're the ones coming from the big bad institutions, but of course we're there because we're asked to be there. And then two, we're also trying to find ways to support their own work through what work we're doing. And so there's been a lot of collaborations with the tribal librarians in that sense, and to help them with projects around community-driven archives and other librarian programs. But yeah, I'm very keen of that. And if I'll definitely be on the opposite of the side of this conversation if things go that way. That's just my experience with ASU. I will give them that much credit that it has been more fruitful and more respectful. And I think it's mainly because of Nancy. So.
I'm going to take your question, Lae'l, because I feel like through our conversations we've answered number 4. So, Alex, you've been very vocal on your campus at Arizona State University and heavily involved with the outreach and engagement there, such as co-authoring the land acknowledgement. Do you see this work as a continuation of your activism or organizing?
I'll say that how that statement how it came together was since land statements are like a thing now, right? Land acknowledgements are kind of a trendy thing that institutions are doing. So it was initially brought up for other circles for that reason, like, oh, we need to have one type of mentality, and it wasn't coming from people of color or native saying it. It was just like, oh, like it's a thing, let's look into it. Eventually that got relayed to me, and at the time the lead librarian and curator at Labriola. And so since I was more or less going to be promoted there, I was in those conversations early on. And so when it was first brought up, it wasn't a bad its purpose wasn't necessarily like coming from a bad place. It was just coming from an uninformed place of like, how is this actually, what's it going to do, right? Because my thing was like, ASU, the university already has one. And I was already kind of irritated by that because it's so general. And it said, well, what does that actually mean for Native people? Like, to me, if this is my own opinion, but if university passes something like that, I feel like that it should mean natives get free tuition. That would be the ultimate, way to reconcile your guilt or your, whatever, you feel about it, is to give us free tuition. But that's above us, and that is money. But in terms of the department, the program, individual unit within the university, I think it's a lot easier to then focus on what does that institution or that unit or program do. So in the case of libraries, as we know, academic libraries are huge in itself, but within there, I was like, well, how is this statement going to reflect what we're doing here internally? And since I was already in the loop, a lot of these conversations, I already knew cool things were happening. So it wasn't like the institution starting from scratch or minus 1,000 trying to like be woke. It was like, oh no, there's a lot of cool stuff already happening right now. So this is not like it's coming from actually a good place. It's just how do we then put it all together and show like we want to make that commitment to advocate for Indigenous knowledge. And that's the main line in that statement, is to advocate. Let's say there was some other drafts that were more fierce, a little more bold, we'll say. But as was told to me, is that this is of course leadership talking, and to their credit, I see their point. If everything plays out the way they foresee it, is that what we would like to, I guess what I saw was like, okay, we have Nancy's work going on, and it translated to Labriola to natives, right? So that kind of goes back to the last question, where it's like, okay, you are putting in place some type of project or service for natives around community-driven archives, which I feel helps uplift those stories to help build that community memory, which is ultimately cultural sovereignty, right? So that's a plus. The fact that you now have 2 Labriola centers, right? You have one in Hayden, one at West Campus. That's an expansion of the service. Okay, that's another plus. 3, you're getting me on board, and you're getting another knowledge river student on board to be in these spaces, right? To support your staff, right? In terms of staff development and so on. So that's why that was kind of like, those are, to me, good check marks. And then into that, getting into more around the adoption of the protocols for Native American archival material that was passed 6 or 8 months before it came up. So it's like, okay, like there is a culture here that's saying that we want to support. I think the next push is very more, how do you really push? Because it's one thing to have all this going on. It's one thing to kind of, have your hand in all these pots, but then it's going to be certain people maybe like myself, or other Native professionals that could really synthesize and really push this. So, and to your question, then, yeah, like I feel it is a combination of things that were already happening, but also having someone like myself and the other student I'm referring to like advocate that, because there's plenty of meetings where it came out good, but it's just say they needed to have a Native perspective in there. They needed to have like someone to like really put things in perspective, because sometimes when we're not in the room, things go adrift. And so I think that this shows more of a commitment of staff development and mentoring and all those diversity initiatives we can talk about here, that shows that, yeah, like this is kind of part of that. So the land statement, it's good. But ultimately we need a land statement policy, because right now the way it was worded to me was that this land statement is more of a vision statement, right? What do we want a year from now, 5 years from now? So if organizations start looking at it from, it's a vision statement, then you can actually actualize it on a whatever project level, and then put it more for policy. And that's what we would say, hey, we're doing this compared to what we're saying we're going to do. And that's kind of where we're at now. And I'm kind of trying to keep in that boat afloat right now. So
creating that accountability.
Basically, yeah. I'm sure I could have said that a lot shorter and sweeter, but yeah.
No, that was perfect. Valencia, do you want to do, since you're the next one, do you want me to, how you want to?
I'll take it. So as the manager of the Labriola National American Indian Data Center at Arizona State University, how do you feel you have been how do you feel you have been impacted to be an agent of change in the archival profession?
I mean, because technically, yeah, I am a staff position, so it's not academic position. Of course, I need my degree, which I'm 4 weeks away to get from, and we'll see how the organization supports me at that point. But for the time being, I feel that it is. I mean, I'll give them credit that they recognize that the reason there's a West Campus branch, or 2 locations, was because of renovations in the Hayden Library. So initially, it was, we'll just send it out here, get it renovated, and we'll bring the center back to Tempe. But when they came out to West, they recognized other students out here appreciated it being here, and making those connections and ties in that 1.5-year time period. So they didn't want to like rip that away. Why would you bring something out and say, hey, sorry, it's back to Tempe. So with me in there, or it kind of like my journey in terms of graduating, my undergraduate, to some of my accolades, we'll say, being a knowledge river student at University of Arizona, and then making a decision to say, hey, let's put Alex there, right? So he has all these qualities and skill sets that speak to someone that should be in this unit of the library. So in terms of where I'm at now, it's in many ways just how it typically goes in the academic library, where initially it was supposed to be me and the lead curator, and she got promoted. So she got out of the center, and then it's like, well, she was Tempe, the main campus, and I'm on the West Campus. So it's like, okay, well, just for time, I picked up those additional responsibilities. And not because, it was forced on me or anything like that. It was more so like me seeing like, hey, this is important, to also support not just the West Campus, like with my job description entails, but also to say, hey, to support Natives as a whole. Granted, COVID happened, so the logistics of it were a little easier in a sense, because we weren't physically spread out across 2 campuses throughout most of this year, right? Because of just everything being on Zoom, but just still being in those conversations, being in a position to share a lot of that knowledge that I've shared earlier, and just my own expertise and understanding of these things. I felt that, I feel like just me being who I am, right, is kind of just being that agent of change in that sense of like knowing like my community and knowing, or drawing from that my background. So, example of my engagement activities here this past semester, a lot of it is coming from my hip hop, connections and ties, and just, hey, like I met so and so on tour. Like we just had this awesome zine making Native poetry series this past 2 months, and it's because of a friend I met 10, 12 years ago in Flagstaff, Arizona, and she's doing her own thing too. And she's finished her grad program in fine arts out in Berkeley. So like she's from Phoenix. So it's just like those organic ties. And to me, it's just like a matter of calling them up or messaging them and making those arrangements and so on. So yeah, just my own background is that agent of change. Because out of that, yeah, she's going to say some real stuff. We're going to say some real stuff. We're going to hopefully engage our students and community to think about these things in a more critical way. But this is one example. So even back on the reservation, if I was going to make it just Tohono O'odham, just having a relative, right? Having like my aunties who are on council down there, just to talk about these issues, like that's hopefully pushing the conversation. And there's a need for that conversation in other sectors here or areas here on campus around social justice and this like, what does it mean? Or we talk about police, all the stuff going on this past year, unfortunately, with police, violence against our communities. The way I see it, it's like that's the extension. It's like border patrol harassment for me. That's what I was saying back in 2008 and 9 when we had Sheriff Joe. In 2012, we have SB 1070, and now with this guy who now hopefully leaves office soon. It's like these are all escalations that, in addition to the state attacking our communities, like with police. I deal with that every time I go to a reservation. Like I dealt with that when I went to my internship last week at our tribal college. In order to go to that tribal college, I was digitizing language materials last week. I had to go through a checkpoint every day, right? And to see like just how that's changed my whole lifetime, so that this bothers me. And of course, I'm telling my own supervisor, who's an administrator here at ASU, like this, how was your day, Alex? Right? And you're just like, oh, for a checkpoint. And like for some, that's just like, whoa, that's a lot. And it's like, that's just how it is, and we're still here and we still have to do the work. I still have to go through this checkpoint for the next 5 days for my internship to digitize this awesome language materials from the 60s and 70s. And yeah, it pisses me off that I go through a checkpoint, but at the same time, that's just the reality. So this me sharing this conversation with you, I hope, hey, now you know. And so keep that in mind when grant opportunities come up or things come up that we can reframe and restructure these narratives and stories around the border or whatever, social justice. It's not just everybody but natives. Because I think that's always the thing is a lot of times our struggles are not there. So this me being there or other natives, that just really adds to that visibility.
All of our struggles, Black and brown communities, we are tied together. So we have to make sure we advocate for each other and tell each other stories and be aware of what each of us are going through. So yes, fully in agreement. We don't want to keep you in here forever, although we really wish we could. So I'm gonna pop down to one of the last questions. I'm really gonna ask you to think of something to take us out on at the end, Alex. But my next question for you, what do you think, and you hinted at this already, what do you think archivists or memory workers need to know when working with activists in marginalized communities?
I feel that, similar to this, the basis of community-driven archives is that, the community is already an expert. The community already knows a lot, already has that knowledge set that for an outsider, it's a learning curve or, it's like, whoa, like I didn't know. Like back to what I was saying earlier with the border stuff, it's like, just talking to an elder, right? Or just even a high school kid, they could school you on just obviously some geopolitical isms and schisms right now without even saying some academic term. So when we work with, when archivists are working with activists, I think it's good to know, or they should be aware that, of course, they don't know everything. Granted, they may be an expert in that area. They may have written a dissertation on it or thesis or whatever, and that's definitely good. It helps you understand, what you're getting into. But there's just certain things that are just not written down. There's certain things that you're not going to find in Google or any of our databases and so on that our community is living through. That's an unfortunate thing with my community, and this is something I have to push my friends, and, peers and younger people under me. It's like, we need more O'odham to be in space like this, talking to y'all, right? Where like this hopefully brings some visibility to other folks to be aware of some of the things they've said. And at that point, know, okay, well, there's a way to learn, through what's online. And also there's things that will come out when they're supposed to come out. And that goes back to community-driven archives, is that those things may only come out for the community to know, or the village to know, or the district to know. And that goes into this access, right? And it goes into what's supposed to be beyond the res and what's off the res. So there is a time and place for all this knowledge. And I think as an archivist, sometimes, you don't see it gets that deep, on that more village community level. And of course, I'm assuming we're talking about like a woke archivist here, right? And it's obviously it's you know, white archivist or someone who doesn't get it. That's a cultural competency issue, we'll say, let alone it's just kind of racism issue. But in terms of just even our own, even as another native, right, it doesn't mean they know everything about my tribe. Like if I work with another tribal member from back east or Navajo Nation or different tribe, there's things I need to check myself on. So it's not just in a general level. So yeah, I think archivists need to just listen, right, and just recognize that they don't have all the expertise. They just need to go where the community wants them to go. And eventually, yeah, that knowledge you have is going to plug in somewhere. It's just you have to be patient and learn. And I know we're always on these timelines and grants and all this bigger stuff we're used to in academia. But like, there's something I'm working now with a project down in Tucson where I thought the project would be going by now, right? But it's kind of like we have to be flexible and just go with the community needs and just check in, and it will happen, right? And of course, you got to allocate certain times and budgets, but it just takes time to build that trust, because at least for all of us here in this call, we're coming from an institution. That's another barrier to deal with, right? Just the fact that you work for so and so. Granted, we're from where we're from, but we still have to inform and educate our community. We're here to support, to use our talents to help the people. So,
I love it. Thank you. Yes, all the sense. I'm gonna let you take the Blueprint 5, Valencia.
All right.
Out a little bit more.
So the Blueprint 5, these rapid questions.
Oh, cool.
Yeah. So who has been a major influence to you, dead or alive?
Oh my God. Music wise?
It's however you want to answer it. It's you.
I'll just say, I'll keep it traditional and everybody else.
Okay.
Grandpa and Malcolm X.
All right.
I wrote a 12-page paper on Malcolm X in 5th grade. So.
Oh, love it.
That's why the way I am.
Love it. Gotta love it.
All right. What's on your playlist right now?
Are y'all familiar with a rapper named Odyssey from Maryland, actually? DC?
That's bad, and I'm working in Maryland, so I shouldn't know, but I do.
He's in Brooklyn now. Look up Odyssey. Like, to me, in the current era, he's out there. He's definitely got a name, but he didn't blow, right, in that larger mainstream sense. But he has some tracks with J. Cole back in the day. But yeah, look him up. Odyssey. Oddisee. Odyssey. He's dope.
All right, we're about to check that out.
What fuels you and what feeds you?
It's my family. And back to what I was saying, my community. But in many ways, our community is our family, our roots, when we say Hajin in my language, that means, our relations. That doesn't just mean your nuclear family or even your extended family. It means like your village, right? It means your bigger, your roots. And so to me, it's always family and community. That's what drives me. But also too, just the young author need to see that there's other authors in these spaces doing modern things, but still keeping it rooted with who we are. We need more awesome role models who are in this current era. It's easy to say how it used to be, and that's fine, but we need people now to be like, hey, like this is what you can do in 2021. You can rap, you can be a librarian, you can be an archivist, you can be a lawyer, whatever it is, and you can still be in the village hanging out with the grandmas, right? Like that's what it comes down to for me. So.
All right. And what advice do you want to share to those who will come after you?
That culture always changes. It's fluid. Although I'm O'odham, and my definition of O'odham is a lot different than my grandparents, and same thing for them to their grandparents. And I think that's always the thing, at least with natives, is that we're fixated on going back to how it used to be, or like the ways, the traditional ways. And I feel that those who are native just to like embrace the new, as long as you have your foot still on the old. And I think that's one of the ways it's going to make you realize or adopt new things, because we've always adopted new things. It's just, I think now it's sometimes not cool to say that, and that's why I'm going to say it here. It's like, hey, like you just need to make it awesome, make it native, make it whoever you are. You know, we take these tools and we'll do our own thing with it, you know. So.
All right.
I felt that today. Do you feel that today?
Yeah, I do. I was going to say that was beautiful, and like Lae'l said earlier, I could talk to you all day.
All day. Well,
only if we have a cipher.
I will not embarrass myself like that. I will watch you be excellent.
Part 2, we can practice, Valencia. We can practice. You can beatbox and then beatbox transition and all that. So
I have many skills, and that's not one of them.
We gotta bring somebody on here to do a cipher with you. We have to.
That would be dope to find another, or not another, find one. I know they're there, like an archivist or librarian that raps too, and like I would want to nerd out like on that whole what's it called from Chicago. What's it called? The media project they had out there. I know Chance the Rapper was part of it in the Chicago Public Library. U-Media, is that what it's called?
Maybe. I know what you're talking about.
Yeah.
But it was closing, wasn't it?
Yeah, I saw that like a month ago or something, how funding or whatever, but because I did a paper 2 years ago on that. I'm drawing a blank right now on the name, but it reminded me a lot of the stuff I was doing in Phoenix if we were able to get that support. And I loved how they had that space and they had like an open mic and all that.
We're going to leave this as a cliffhanger for our viewers that we're going to do a cipher with Alex in the future. But we're going to conclude at this point. Thank you so much for speaking with us and sharing your blueprint with us. And it was really an honor. So just terribly humble. Just thank you so much.
Thank you.
Well, thank you. Yeah, I can talk forever it seems, but hopefully I added to the conversation, to the podcast, the series. I know we didn't get into kind of like the details of the work. And a lot of times, there's so much we could talk about this work alone, but I felt I wanted just to share a little bit of who I am and why I'm here, and just a lot of natives in the same boat, who are still adopting and learning this profession and making it our own, like I said earlier. And so that will definitely be the focus of my chapter in the book, even though I haven't sent you the abstract yet, but I will. And I already got a couple lines, just, trying to finish school too, but I'll email you about that. So sorry about that.
You're spilling the tea about our book.
Oh, we'll edit that part. My bad.
No, we'll just leave it as a cliffhanger. People will be like, what book? What's coming out? Oh my gosh.
We put the cipher in the book. That's what you got to do.
Oh, my bad.
Got to cop the book to get the cipher.
Yep. So it was all good. Oh gosh. Thank you so much, Alex. You just don't even know. Just thank you.
Okay. Well, feel free to edit the last part out. My bad.
No, this is all good. It's all good.
However you want to do some effects on there, kind of as if I cursed or something. Like, oh no, you didn't mean to say that. So
no, this is real honest. So we're gonna keep it like that.
Okay. Well, we'll chat later then. Thank you, Paul. Nice to meet you, Valencia.
Nice to meet you.